President Biden says all indications show Russia is getting ready to attack Ukraine. The latest U.S. intelligence shows Russia has bolstered its presence on the border, and recent attacks by Russian-backed separatists could give Moscow the excuse it's looking for to move in. Vice President Harris has met with NATO allies trying to forge a diplomatic solution. Well, joining us with more is a fellow with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Andrew Lohsen. Andrew, thanks for joining us. Russia claims that it withdrew some troops and that it wants diplomacy, but the U.S. and NATO allies say that Moscow has staged an estimated 190,000 troops around Ukraine. So do you believe that Putin truly wants diplomacy and that this troop buildup is somewhat of a response to Western military moves? Or is this all for show? Is it a bluff?
I think it still remains to be seen exactly what Putin is going to do. Certainly, he's bringing all of the pieces into play to mount an invasion of Ukraine that could have untold casualties and consequences for Ukraine and for the broader region. I think the path to diplomacy remains open. There's still an exchange of letters that's taking place, but I think recently some of the signs that we're seeing out of Russia are showing that that path is narrowing, and that Russia is really taking this as a take it or leave it approach. Give us all of our security guarantees or pay the price.
Some people are looking at the Minsk agreement as a possible way out of the crisis in Ukraine, but there's a loophole, I understand, in the agreement. Russia isn't mentioned specifically in the text, despite having signed off on it. So how could Moscow use that to their advantage, and what's being done to address it?
Well, Russia is a signatory of the Minsk agreements, and what we're seeing in terms of its statements from Russian diplomats is that it's applying a very creative interpretation about its own role. Russia tries to say that it's a mediator to this conflict, but in fact, it does have obligations under the Minsk agreement. It's just that it's trying to pretend as though it is not involved. But we've seen countless times evidence of Russian involvement in this conflict that's been provided by the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. That's included statements from prisoners taken by Ukrainian armed forces. The prisoners said that they were members of the Russian armed forces. We've also seen military convoys appear crossing from Russia into non-government controlled Ukraine at all hours of the night. And finally, there's been observations of specialized military equipment that is only in the arsenal of the Russian military. So unfortunately, Russia is simply claiming something that is not true, that it's not a party to the Minsk agreements. And if it were to recognize its own role and act in good faith, then it would have the obligations to remove its forces under the Minsk agreements.
Yeah, it seems to be saying one thing but doing another. Now, we've talked about this before, but Andrew, remind our viewers what Russia has to gain by invading Ukraine and what is at stake for the U.S. and all of our allies if an invasion does actually happen.
Well, for Russia, this is an opportunity to show force, to tell the West and the rest of the world that its security concerns absolutely must be reckoned with, and that it's willing to go to extremes to get that attention it seeks and to get the respect that it wants. I think for Putin, it's quite clear that if Ukraine continues along a Western path, that means that Russia will no longer have the opportunity to create the sphere of influence that it so wants in the countries along its border, and to be perceived as a great power. And then finally, for Putin himself, this is a legacy project. He's approaching 70. I think he wants to leave office having accomplished something and achieved his place as a great Russian leader. Now, for Western allies, what this is, what Russia is attacking here, is not just, possibly attacking, is not just Ukraine, but it's in fact the entire post-war order. The UN Charter, the Helsinki Final Act, all of these core documents which have enshrined sovereignty and self-determination of states as a core principle, something that's sacrosanct. And Russia's actions here are challenging that. If Russia succeeds, that might open up a new era of expansionist conflict where we are seeing more confrontation with Russia around the world, and it won't stop with Ukraine.
Yeah, and some would say it is a backlash to the breakdown of the Soviet Union, too. You can't forget that. Andrew, thank you so much for bringing it all into perspective. Andrew Lohsen.
It's a pleasure.